For 67 years, Modulo Yuji is the answer to every problem the Jujutsu world cannot solve. He's the strongest active sorcerer alive, the wall between humanity and everything that wants to eat it. The man who once took apart an entire side of Tokyo and made it look like a warm-up. Every record that ever existed has his name on it now. Black Flash on command, domains that fold the strongest curses in seconds, a soul so reinforced from decades of war that nothing in the world can touch it where it actually lives. In a normal timeline, that makes him the Guardian, the hero, the name curses learn to fear before they learn anything else. But what if the world looked at that power and decided the real problem was him? What if the higher-ups, the same cowards who once sealed Gojo and gambled the entire planet on a single teenager, finally admitted they had wrapped a leash around the neck of something that could snap it anytime it felt like it? They've seen this exact story before. They watched one being get too strong and rewrite the rules of the whole world, and his name was Sukuna. So they make a decision. Before Modulo Yuji can ever become that, they're going to put him in the ground first. Every sorcerer, every clan, every sealed weapon and trump card 7 decades of Jujutsu society ever hoarded, all of it pointed at one man. This is what happens when the entire Jujutsu world fights Modulo Yuji alone, and I want to be honest with you up front, it goes about as well as you'd expect. The higher-ups know they can't beat him in a fair fight, so they don't plan one. The whole strategy is coordination. Seal him with the prison realm before he can react, trap him in a domain he can't escape, behead him with the one blade that ignores how strong you are, and if every layer of that fails, bury him under sheer numbers until something finally sticks. On paper, it almost sounds clever. It's the same energy as every villain in history who believed that stacking enough bodies would solve a problem that was never actually about bodies. The flaw is buried in the foundation. Every layer of this plan is designed to beat the kind of sorcerer the world already understands. They're planning for a stronger Gojo, a faster Sukuna, a tougher version of a threat they have already survived. Modulo Yuji is not a stronger version of anything that came before him. 67 years of soul-level warfare turned him into a different breed completely. A fighter whose entire game lives one layer underneath everything their plan was ever built to stop. They're bringing the greatest tools in the history of the craft to a fight those tools were never designed for. And that single mismatch is the whole video. They open with the grade 1s because of course they do. 7 of the strongest grade 1 sorcerers the world can field hit him at the exact same moment. Full output, no warning. The kind of coordinated ambush that should overwhelm almost anyone alive. Modulo Yuji doesn't even shift his stance. He reads every angle of it at once, because 67 years of combat means there is nothing in a grade 1's arsenal he hasn't seen 10,000 times over, and he clears the entire opening wave before half of them finish their incantations. Low diff to the point of being disrespectful. They were never the real plan anyway. They were the speed bump, the bait meant to drag his technique out into the open so the heavier hitters could study how it works. That's where the second crack shows, because there is nothing to study that they can actually use. The special grades come next, the new generation's genuine monsters, and they're strong. I'm not going to downplay them to make him look better. They land clean hits. They draw real cursed energy out of him. A couple of them are straight up eating in the opening exchange, stringing together combinations that would end almost any other fight on the planet. And then his RCT kicks in, converting every wound in real time off that death-painting physiology, walking the damage back faster than they can possibly reopen it. You cannot win a war of attrition against a man who heals the only kind of damage you're capable of doing. Minus 1,000 aura, all of them at once, the second they understand what they're actually looking at.
When the front line crumbles, the great clans empty everything they've been breeding and sealing for exactly this kind of day. This is the part the higher-ups were quietly proudest of. The generations of heavenly restriction prodigies, the inherited techniques refined across decades, the cursed tools locked in vaults that were never meant to see daylight. They send in a fighter built with no cursed energy at all, the heavenly restriction trump card, because a body that produces no energy can't be sensed the normal way and slips past defenses tuned to read cursed output. For a moment, that actually rattles the rhythm of the fight, and the clans think they've found a seam. They haven't. And the reason is brutal. Modulo Yuji stopped relying on cursed energy sensing decades ago.
because soul-level combat taught him to read the soul directly, and a soul is the one thing a heavenly restriction cannot hide. He tracks the trump card by the exact thing it was built to be invisible to, and the clans watch their century-long project get handled like another name on the pile. The inherited techniques, the sealed tools, the bloodline weapons, all of it is genuinely goated craftsmanship, and all of it is aimed at the surface layer he barely lives on anymore. The vault that was supposed to be their high-diff trump turns into another wave he clears on sight. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because the world does have one real answer, and it's the Executioner's Sword, Higuruma's blade, the weapon that severs technique and beheads on contact no matter how durable you are. The single thing that once put real fear into Sukuna himself. They smuggle the wielder into the chaos exactly the way you draw it up on a whiteboard, hidden behind wave after wave of sacrificial bodies, the entire plan narrowing down to one clean cut at the right moment. This is the closest the Jujutsu world ever comes to a W, and I'm not going to LARP like it isn't a real threat. The cut lands, and it does not take. The Executioner's Sword strips the target's cursed technique and slices the body, but Modulo Yuji's soul is the most reinforced thing in the entire verse, hammered into denser and denser shape across decades of fighting on that exact layer. And a blade that beheads the body still has to win the exchange on the plane where he genuinely lives. It doesn't. The sword that terrified Sukuna gets overpowered by a soul that has spent longer fighting on that level than the wielder has been alive. The man holding the world's single best trump card watches it do real, serious damage, and still not nearly enough. And that is the precise moment everyone left on the field understands they are cooked. They spent their best idea, the one card built to kill anything, and the guy rolled his shoulder and kept walking. Of course, the real architect of this whole thing was never going to throw himself into the meat grinder. The schemer who set the trap is content to sit back and let every layer run its course, the way that kind of mind always operates, treating the strongest sorcerer alive as a puzzle to be solved with binding vows and stacked conditions rather than raw power. The plan was always to layer enough restrictions and sacrifices that Modulo Yuji eventually agrees to a vow that boxes him in, the same patient manipulation that nearly cooked the world once before. On paper, intelligence is the one stat the schemer actually has over him. The problem is that intelligence only matters if it can buy a path to victory, and there is no path here to buy. A binding vow needs leverage, something the target wants badly enough to trade restrictions for. And Modulo Yuji wants nothing the schemer can offer, because he isn't trying to win anything, he's just refusing to die. Every clever condition runs into the same wall the muscle did, a man who heals what they can do and kills on a layer they can't defend. And no amount of galaxy-brained planning changes which layer the fight is decided on. The schemer realizes, far too late, that he built the most elaborate trap in Jujutsu history for an opponent who simply walks through the part the trap was never designed to hold. Chat, is this real? The smartest being in the world outplanned by a guy who just would not stay down? So they go for the lock, because the plan's true win condition was always a domain, a guaranteed sure hit to freeze him for the half second it takes the prison realm to seal him, the exact play that once caged Gojo. A domain you cannot escape ends literally anyone, and I'm not going to downplay it. That is the scariest thing they bring to the entire fight. The trouble is, the same warning Gojo himself would have given them if they hadn't sealed every legend who knew better. You have to actually get the domain open and shut before he interrupts you, and Modulo Yuji can throw a black flash on command. Every record broken, the cleanest domain disruption tool that has ever existed in the verse. Every single time a domain begins to form, the barrier needs a fraction of a second to seal itself, and that fraction is the precise window his black flash was made to exploit. He distorts the cursed energy on the exact beat the domain tries to close, and the entire construct collapses before its sure hit can ever land. The prison realm sits there completely useless, because you can't seal what you can't pin, and you can't pin a man who shatters your cage while it's still being built. One domain after another, the most broken win condition the verse has ever produced, and not one of them gets the clean open it desperately needs. The strategy that was supposed to be a high-diff victory turns into one man swatting the world's best ideas out of the sky on sight. The asymmetry is the entire fight, so I'll just say it plainly. Everything the Jujutsu world brought wins the war that happens on the surface. The cursed energy, the approach, the technique trade, the durability contest, the numbers game. Modulo Yuji barely fights there anymore. His soul targeting operates outside what any of their defensive systems were ever designed to stop. The way Mahito touched souls directly and Sukuna cleaved them clean. Except he's had 67 years to sharpen that past anything either of them ever reached. He heals through their best surface offense on a clock they cannot match, and every time he so much as touches one of them, he's touching the soul, where they have no defense and no recovery whatsoever. So run the actual math one more time. One side is fighting a war it could theoretically win if the whole thing were ever about output, and the other side is fighting a war the first side cannot heal from, and both of those clocks are running at the same time. The Jujutsu world is not weak here, and that's the part people miss. They are genuinely goated. The single best collection of sorcerers ever assembled on one battlefield, and against almost any other threat in recorded history, they win clean and go home. They just made the one mistake that actually matters. They pointed all of it at the one man who learned to fight on the layer none of them ever did. And being the strongest world that ever existed means nothing when every weapon you own is built for the wrong game. When the dust finally clears, Modulo Yuji is the only thing still standing, because he was always going to be. Not because the Jujutsu world was mid, they weren't. They brought every legend and every sealed weapon, and the single blade that once scared Sukuna into negotiating. They lose because the entire war was decided one layer beneath where every plan they made was built to fight, and he's the only person alive who's fully locked in on that layer. They didn't lose a fight, they lost a category error, and they paid for it with everything. And here's the part that actually sits with you after the screen goes dark. The higher-ups branded him a threat because they were terrified he might one day turn on the world. He never had. For 67 years, he was the wall standing between humanity and the dark. The one name that made curses hesitate. And the only reason he ever became the monster they feared is that they forced him to fight every single person he'd spent his entire life protecting. They didn't kill the threat before it could rise. They built it with their own hands, handed it a reason, and then called the result a tragedy when it looked back at them. The strongest sorcerer who ever lived ends up standing alone in the wreckage of the only world that ever needed him. And somewhere in the silence, you can already hear the comments doing the math on how the higher-ups rated their odds going in. About 6, 7,